The Galactic Empire spans a galaxy, seizing and suppressing and generally kicking the crap out of anyone the Emperor deems necessary to further his evil plans. The Imperial shipyards are spitting out vessels of all types and makes for any kind of mission they can dream up, and the Imperial Army has a wide range of vehicles and equipment to take the fight to the enemy on any type of terrain or planet. The Stormtrooper Corps has, well, Stormtroopers. Sure, they have cool names like Swamp Trooper, Shore Trooper, Sand Trooper, hell, they even have a Radiation Trooper, but for the most part, if you're looking at the tabletop FFG system, it's just another Stormtrooper with a few boosts to their given favored terrain, like there's some kind of ranger from D&D. So I'm here to fix that. Let's stat out some proper Imperial ground pounders to freak out your players at the table, and to bring a little bit more tactical fun in the battles that you create. There's nothing worse than your players getting kind of bored at the idea of fighting another batch of Stormtroopers. Every battle should be exciting and different and bring a new element that they have to overcome. Now, this can obviously be done with multiple squads, or broken up into different units, or having them come from different sides, or changing the objective of the battlefield, but eventually you're gonna wanna mix it up with what's available to the enemies to use against your players. If the Empire knows that they're gonna be running in a bunch of screws, they're not gonna bring a hammer to get the job done. They're gonna come with the proper tools. So, let's give them some fun tools. Now, to start out, we're gonna talk about the base Stormtrooper. Give us an idea of where we stand so we can start modifying this. Now, the base trooper is considered a minion in FFG, meaning that you're gonna probably wanna use them as a group. You're never gonna have just one Stormtrooper unless you're using them as some kind of maybe guard or a standing watch, and you could alert the rest. Because, as a minion, at least in these rules, you don't get any skills. They're gonna be their base characteristics. Now, I put up on the screen here the base characteristics of your average Stormtrooper. This is in all of the core rulebooks, and it's basically you're kind of flat human, slightly better at some things. Characteristics go 3 in brawn, 3 in agility, 2 in intellect, 2 in cunning, 3 willpower, and 1 presence. Now, the brawn and the agility is important. This is gonna be your combat, your baseline combat green dice. Having a brawn 3 and agility 3 means they're gonna be rolling decently to fire their blaster with agility, or pulling out that vibro knife to get into a melee combat scenario with one of your players. Having that brawn adds a little bit more damage and allows them to have the better chance to hit. They're also a little bit tankier than some of the other minions, particularly the Imperial Army troopers. They've got 5 soak. That laminate armor isn't just for looks, it actually is pretty decent, and a 5 wound threshold. Now, as a minion, the more minions you add, the more wounds that they get as a group, and they'll start tacking on skills. Your base Stormtrooper has the skills Athletics, Discipline, Melee, and Ranged Heavy. Now, Ranged Heavy means don't give them a pistol, they're going to be awful with it. Make sure that they have, well, something that takes 2 hands, hence the Ranged Heavy. That's a weapon that takes 2 hands to really use. You're talking, well, for any Ranged Heavy, it could be like a crossbow or a bowcaster from a Wookiee, or a proper rifle like an E11, like you see here these guys holding. Now, in their base gear and equipment stats, they can have a blaster rifle, the generic one. This is normally what I use for my stats for the E11, which does decent damage, 9 on the output, right at the start, and crits on a 3. Not amazing, and especially if you don't have enough Stormtroopers in a group, they're not gonna be rolling crits all the time, but as you add more to it, they'll have better skills. Every extra minion adds 1 point into their skills. So you have a group of 5 minions, and suddenly a Stormtrooper squad is rolling 4 yellows and a green. That's a pretty decent roll, and that's 3 dice that could potentially roll a triumph for a crit. Also, they only need a 3 advantage to trigger a critical on their target. But after you fought them a few times, you realize, all right, their normal kit loadout's probably gonna be a blaster rifle. Maybe they've got a frag grenade on them, a vibro knife, and if you get really crazy, they might have a light repeating blaster, which can be a little scary, but your players will get used to fighting this, particularly if you're playing a rebel campaign where they're fighting Imperial Stormtroopers quite often. So let's borrow a couple of units straight out of, well, this year's probably best Star Wars game to come out, Jedi Fallen Order. The Imperial Heavy Assault Trooper. Oh yeah, now we're talking. The Empire is sick of this rebellious nonsense, and they're coming down hard on the players. So they send in the heavy guns, or, well, gun in this case. Some of you will immediately recognize it, by the way, that rotary cannon. That's the Z6 from Clone Wars fame. So let's work through the role of this character from a lore and gameplay perspective. First, the lore. The Heavy Assault Trooper is a specialized weapons tech trained in offering support and generally overwhelming amounts of blaster fire on target, perfect for suppressing large numbers of enemies. The weapon's size and weight makes it better used in defensive roles or in siege situations where speed and maneuverability of the squad he's with isn't key. After a number of field engagements, Imperial officers noted that the heavy trooper spewing hundreds of blaster bolts across the battlefield would quickly become the primary target of insurgents. To that end, the Empire has outfitted the trooper with better, thicker laminate armor to allow the trooper to continue their barrage even under the most dire of small arms fire. So let's talk through the stats. First, the armor. Now, Fallen Order has the heavy wearing shoulder pads that's kind of reminiscent of the Imperial squad leader like the Sergeant, which we actually have stats for. So why not first, let's borrow those stats and turn this guy into a rival instead of the minions like base Stormtroopers. Now this already makes him far more dangerous in the field. Rivals have a few different rule sets. One, they actually have skills. They don't need to be a minion group, they can just be one unit. We'll borrow the stats from that Sergeant, and we'll switch a few around. This isn't a leadership character, so why don't we remove that, and let's replace it with gunnery, as his job is to use heavy weapons in the field, not just the Z6, but whatever the Empire requires. The rest of the skills work out pretty well. Vigilance is perfect for a possible ambush. It gives him a chance to get higher in the initiative order, noticing something is wrong, and then spewing rounds in that direction when he thinks there's something over there. Resilience is okay. If the players try something crazy, Resilience will allow him to maybe resist a poison or maybe some kind of gas cloud. There's all kinds of storyline reasons why Resilience would queue in here. Melee kind of makes sense in case he needs to drop the heavy weapon and get into combat, and it is a base Stormtrooper skill and he would have the base training. And Athletics could allow him to climb to a higher position to get a better view of the battlefield. So alright, I'm happy with all of these skills. They're all pretty straightforward. So let's get into the weapon. Now I'm really happy that Fallen Order decided to use the Z6 rotary blaster cannon, something we already have stats for, and it has some fun strengths and weaknesses. One of the biggest strengths is its range goes all the way out to long range, so you can really throw some fire out there. It does 12 damage, which is a sizable bit more than the 9 that General Stormtrooper E11 does, but it only crits on a 4. It's going to be harder to get those crits. It is also heavy at Encumbrance 6, but it's got a few upgrade points, so if your players run into a few of these troopers over the course of the campaign, maybe use some of those points, those upgrade points, to twist and change what that Z6 is. And remember,
in our faith, you keep what you kill.
At least that's how I play my campaigns. If you've got a heavy soldier character using that specialization, that Z6 is going to be really exciting. Talk about mixed emotions when a door opens and a heavy walks out with this big rotating cannon that's spinning up. Well, your gunner character is going to be like, ooh, shiny, while the rest of the characters are probably going to be shitting themselves. Now, getting into the special bits of the Z6, and this is the fun part, it does have auto fire, but a twist on this weapon compared to all the other heavy weapons is it's auto fire only. That means you gotta use the auto fire the auto fire special rules. It's gonna make it harder to hit targets with because it sprays rounds like crazy. And the other special thing it has is prepare. And I believe this is representing the idea that the barrels on this actually have to spin up. So you're gonna have to use a maneuver to prepare the weapon before it can fire. Now, GMs, when you're using this character, remember, the Z6 does have one other special describer on there, and that is that you can spend 2 threat to have the weapon overheat, and it can actually damage the wielder by 2 strain, while the weapon becomes damaged itself. Now, this is great for a couple of reasons. One, as he's firing it away, if he rolls really poorly against the players, the weapon could potentially overheat, giving them an opening to strike. Also, it will damage the Z6, so when your heavy weapon user goes over to pick it up, it'll have a mark point or 2 points of damage on it, which means the mechanic of the group will have something to do, actually get in there and fix it up, and maybe even start to modify it as they get to shine in their particular career skill. Make sure you're using that weapon damage mechanic. It makes it a great thing for the mechanics to work on. All right, so we've got the Z6 rotary blaster cannon. It's a fairly unique weapon. It's a little scary when it comes on the battlefield, and it should be a big deal. Make sure you describe this weapon as it shows up and starts winding up and spewing blaster bolts everywhere. Everyone has to duck down. There's some great ways that you can use advantage as this weapon's firing off, maybe give players setbacks because they're suppressed from the incoming fire, all kinds of fun things. And don't forget, auto fire is a very powerful ability for this kind of mini boss elite lieutenant to be using. as it allows multiple hits not just on one target, but other targets in the room, so you can spread out the pain a bit between your players. Moving on, the Flame Trooper. Nothing strikes fear into the hearts of your enemies like a giant gout of flame bursting from a flame projector. Originally used to stave off the local fauna and flora to defend Imperial facilities on worlds like Kashyyyk and Agris, certain Imperial commanders realized how effective such a tool could be, clearing out enemy combatants from bunkers and structures. Others believe it's a natural extension of the Tarkin doctrine, rule by fear. Luke Skywalker had seen firsthand the devastation of such a weapon. During the time of the Republic, this would be considered easily a war crime. Even in the Imperial military, it's labeled as a tool, so players should be wary of using or carrying a flame projector either into battle or into the local cities. Even the most lawless of towns will raise issue with such a device. The Flame Trooper is an interesting one to stat out. We could make it a minion, go that route, and it'd be pretty squishy for something so strong in the way of damage. It only does a damage of 8, but it has a burn of 3, meaning it continues to reapply that damage every single turn if burn is triggered. It also has a blast of 8, so we can spread out among a lot of targets with engaged range of whatever you shoot at. So how do we stat him out? Now, personally, I'm inclined to make this guy a low-end rival. Maybe not as tanky as, say, the last one we came up with, the Heavy Trooper. But I think I'd like to use the squad rules. Now, these are optional rules that can be found over at Rise of the Separatists, page 136. It's one of the expansion books. And let me explain why. There's a neat interplay between how this works. In squad rules, if you have a squad with you, either player or NPC, in this case an Imperial Flame Trooper, say he's got a couple of normal Stormtroopers around him. For squad rules, and I'm just generalizing here, you'll actually have to buy the rulebook to figure out all the rule sets that he can use. But generally, these Stormtroopers that are kind of backing him up as part of the squad, he can choose, or the GM in this case can choose to have those squad members, those minions, take the damage of every hit that comes his way for him until he's out of targets. Now there's a list of ways that you can spend threat and advantage and despairs on this, but the reason that I find that interesting is that he'll always have a minion or two around him backing him up, kind of soaking up some damage, allowing him to stay in the fight a little bit longer, because some players are going to say, ooh, flame projector, we need to put that down fast, and they're going to focus their fire on him. The squad rules will allow him to survive at least an extra round or two and get to do something cool. Now, the reason that I want minions near him is because of the description that's the little bit of text that goes along with this. Basically, if you roll 2 threat in any combat check with this thing, the GM can decide that it hits his allies. And if we have the minion squad rules in play, there'll always be allies nearby. So, he turns quickly and sees the enemy Jedi or Rebel Commando coming his way. He lights it up, and his idiot buddy walks 2 feet too far forward and gets a blast at the side of the flame projector's gout as it comes out, deep frying him. Whether or not the Jedi or Commando survives, well, I wonder how good his soak is, or does he even miss? So statting him out, the flame projector is a heavy range, so the base Stormtrooper skills work just fine. As a rival, probably lower the amount of health that he has compared to the heavy. Don't have him have so much. The heavy in our last example had the sergeant stat, so he had 15 wounds and 5 soak. You could bring that down, or you could just leave it the way it is, depending on how strong your players are and how frightening you want this encounter to be. I mean, you can always add more of them or more minions to make him last longer for using the squad rules. Mixing up a few of these units, like throwing in the sergeant, throwing in one of the heavies, and maybe a flame trooper, if you really want to get into a crazy battle. With the sergeant in there, he actually has the tactical direction, which will allow minion groups around him to move around. I might even upgrade that to some kind of like upgraded tactical direction, allowing him to have rivals move around on the battlefield. Maybe you bring in an officer that can do that to really mix it up so you can get that extra maneuver in. Maybe they get a chance to aim, or they get to be able to move around a little bit farther on the battlefield to keep the battle interesting and mobile. But there you go, flame projector. You can up his stats, use squad rules. Remember the threats and despairs on that when you're using it in combat as a GM. A lot of fun can be had. Moving on. The Rocket Trooper is an ordnance-focused Stormtrooper, armed with the RPS-6 Smart Rocket Launcher, a long-range weapon great at taking on insurgents, infantry, or vehicles in an urban setting. I say urban due to its limited range compared to most vehicles' main weapons, which could easily outrange a single infantry launcher such as this. Long range from personal scale versus long range on vehicle scale are two different things. The RP-6 rocket launcher is already statted out for us through Rise of the Separatists on page 52. And of course, it's a gunnery weapon. So let's go ahead and add gunnery to his skill list. Now let's keep the rest the same, as it represents a normal Stormtrooper but with a bit more training. Let's make him a rival, so he doesn't have to be attached to a large minion group to be useful, and give him 1 rank in each of his base skills, with 2 ranks in gunnery. Let's also give him 2 ranks in vigilance and cool, and I'll explain that later. Now, the rocket is what he focuses on. He should be half decent at it. So the rocket is his main focus, that's why we're giving him 2 points into gunnery. The base stats are fine, but let's increase his health to say 15, the same as the sergeant. He won't be as strong as the Stormtrooper Sergeant because he won't have the adversary rank that character gets, which upgrades any attacks against him, making him a little harder to hit and the opportunity for player despairs to be rolled. The RPS-6 is a fun weapon. Having lots of missile options, it can fire frag, armor piercing, or EMP. But there are a few things that I don't like about the base stats that the players would be using. In the base stats, it's got a 7-round magazine for a backloaded rocket launcher. Alright, but let's go ahead and give this thing slow firing 1. Why? Well, a base rocket does 22 damage and can fire at extreme personal scale range, well beyond that of most weapons, except for, say, sniper rifles. And it has a breach of 1, meaning it can cut through either 1 point of a ship's armor or 10 points of personal soak. In other words, it can cut through most infantry personnel armor like butter. At 22 straight damage with no armor to absorb it, that's enough to drop most player characters in 1 shot. And it has blast, but we're not gonna go into this. I actually like that it can take down a character in 1 hit. It'll shock your players and have them running for cover, but since we added slow firing, the trooper has to wait around before firing it again, this representing the time it takes to reload the rocket launcher, something that we've seen a bunch in Fallen Order. Also, this gives the GM time to choose what kind of rocket to use next. This also gives our players time to collect their fallen comrade by dragging him to cover and maybe out of line of sight of the Stormtrooper with the rocket launcher, and give him a quick stim pack or whisper a quick prayer to the Force for that close miss. Make sure, GMs or DMs out there, when you describe the destructive power of this weapon, make it absolutely clear to the players that it would have dropped them in 1 hit if it connected. Even when describing it, make sure you describe if it does hit as hitting nearby and blowing the character 10 or 15 feet away and slamming into something. Don't describe it as you literally get hit by a full-size anti-vehicle rocket. That'd be a little silly. So why vigilance and cool? We added that to the skill list. Well, this is the kind of NPC that you want to have a high initiative on, or at least a chance of a high initiative on the roll. Or he'll be taken down so quickly by your players, he'll never get a single shot off. It also helps to represent this character's advanced targeting tech built into the rocket system and the armor he's wearing, having a higher chance to spot the players they're trying to stealth around. It's not a guarantee, but with such low initiatives on the standard troopers, it's more likely he'll never get to fire if we don't boost it. You could make this a specialized minion group instead of a rival. With each trooper that takes a hit from the incoming player fire, the next runs up and grabs the rocket and desperately tries to reload it before the players can take them out. It's up to you. I personally like the idea that there's just one guy that's really good at this one weapon. Now, some other things to keep in mind. This is a great NPC to bring out into the field if you know your players are running around with vehicles. That breach point will allow it to pierce some damage. 20 points of damage actually counts as 2 points of vehicle damage, which means that criticals are possible. If you can pierce the armor and do actual damage to the vehicle, you could crit it. So you could potentially disable their vehicle or cause it to light on fire, all kinds of fun things that are in the crit system. Wow, that's only 3 NPCs, and this video is already way longer than I'd planned. I have a bunch left over. If you'd like to see more of this, let me know. Links in the description for each character stat card I've made up, so they're quick reference cards to see exactly what the stats are for these characters. So you can either print them out and bring them to your table or even import them into your digital table. I personally use Tabletop Simulator. It's very easy to bring cards into that. But you can also do the same for like Roll20 or whatever. You're more than welcome to repost these cards. You can change the stats if you'd like and repost them. Give me your ideas for some of these characters. Maybe I even like your balance better than my own. Let me know if you've got your own favorite Stormtrooper variants too that you'd like to see. I love seeing new enemies that could potentially show up on the field of battle for my players to be involved with and take out. Thank you all for watching. I can't wait to read your comments, and I'll see you all next time.